Have you ever considered what it truly means when a war is fought, not just with courage and strategy, but with the relentless, unthinking power of a factory? Imagine a battlefield where the very air thrums with a sound that isn't the chaotic clang of individual combat, but a rhythmic, terrifying symphony of overwhelming industrial might. Picture yourself on a small, distant island, the sun barely piercing the pre-dawn gloom. And then, without warning, the world around you begins to disintegrate. Not because of a single explosion, but because of a continuous, unending torrent of metal, a storm of bullets so dense and so sustained that it feels less like an attack and more like a geological event, a grinding force of nature unleashed. This isn't a scene from a science fiction nightmare. This was the brutal, horrifying reality for Japanese soldiers in the Pacific Theater of WW2, a reality irrevocably shaped by a weapon, or rather a system of weapons, America's M1919 and M2 Browning machine guns. These weren't just firearms. They were the concentrated expression of an industrial revolution, the physical embodiment of a nation's capacity to produce, to supply, and to sustain a level of firepower that left their adversaries utterly stunned, bewildered, and ultimately broken. Let's rewind to April 1st, 1945, a date etched into history for reasons far beyond April Fool's pranks. Dawn was breaking over Okinawa, a rugged island outpost that would become the stage for one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Deep within the island's labyrinthine limestone caves and fortified coral ridges, the Imperial Japanese 32nd Army waited. Their resolve was absolute, their training steeped in the ancient warrior code of Bushido, a doctrine emphasizing spiritual strength, personal courage, and an unyielding commitment to fight to the last man. They were prepared for a fight, an honorable, brutal struggle against an invading force. But what approached them was something entirely different. The American 10th Army, an immense force of 183,000 men, was not just bringing numbers. They were bringing an unprecedented, almost unthinkable, mathematical equation of death. Central to this equation was a family of weapons that would redefine the very nature of battlefield lethality: the Browning machine guns. Consider the sheer scale for a moment. Every M1919A4 Browning machine gun in an American weapons platoon was typically deployed with 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Every M2 Browning heavy machine gun, a behemoth of destruction, was mounted with an initial supply of 500 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. The Japanese soldiers, huddled in their positions, had one simple, desperate goal: to survive a torrent of American firepower that exceeded their own capacity by ratios that no army in history had ever truly confronted or imagined. This wasn't merely a tactical disadvantage, it was an existential one. The sound itself was the first herald of this new reality. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, commanding a machine gun section of the Imperial Japanese 24th Division, vividly recounted his first encounter. On that fateful morning, he heard a peculiar sound, a gentle, almost rhythmic drumming against the coral outcroppings of Hill 89. In his initial confusion, his mind, perhaps seeking comfort in familiarity, mistook it for rainfall on metal, a strange meteorological phenomenon. A gentle patter. But then, the very limestone around his observation post began to chip, to crack, to disintegrate under an invisible force. It was then that the horrifying truth dawned on him. What he heard was not rain. It was the mathematical expression of American industrial might, translated into a terrifying auditory signature. It was the M1919A4 Browning machine gun firing at a blistering rate of 600 rounds per minute. It was the sound that Japan would learn to fear above all others, a sound that spoke of an inexhaustible, relentless mechanical fury. Lieutenant Tanaka's own unit, his two Type 99 light machine guns, were theoretically capable of approaching 800 rounds per minute. A respectable rate on paper, certainly. But in the cruel crucible of reality, the Japanese faced acute and pervasive ammunition shortages. This meant that each of his guns was limited to 30-round magazines, and more critically, to careful, measured bursts. His entire section, for the duration of the entire engagement, had a grand total of 2,000 rounds. 2,000 rounds. Now, let that sink in. The Americans facing him across that very same ridge line possessed more ammunition in a single M1919A4 machine gun than his entire section carried into battle. This wasn't just a disparity, it was an abyss. The chasm between their capabilities went far beyond mere numbers. When Tanaka's Type 99 light machine gun fired, it chambered the 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge, a round designed with a philosophy of efficiency and, more tellingly, conservation. It was effective, yes, but it was designed for a context where every bullet counted, where waste was unthinkable. When the American M1919A4 Browning fired, it chambered the robust .30-06 Springfield cartridge, pushing a 150-grain bullet at an astonishing 2,750 feet per second. The terminal effect was devastating, often described as having nearly twice the kinetic energy of the Japanese round. It wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about tearing through it, about creating a suppressive zone of pure, unadulterated violence. But the true revelation, the one that broke the spirit and defied the understanding of Japanese soldiers, came not from technical specifications or ballistic charts. It came from observing American machine gun crews operate with an almost casual abundance, a profligacy that bordered on the surreal. Where Japanese doctrine, forged in an environment of scarcity, demanded precise fire control and the utmost ammunition conservation, American gunners employed sustained fire as a fundamental tactical principle. They didn't fire to conserve. They fired to create an overwhelming suppressive effect, to turn a piece of ground into an uninhabitable hellscape. They fired until the barrel heat forced a cooling break. Then, with another gun seamlessly taking over, they resumed firing. The relentless tempo never truly broke. Private First Class Kenji Yamamoto, an ammunition carrier in Lieutenant Tanaka's section, kept a diary. These observations, stark and poignant, would later be found by American forces, offering a rare window into the Japanese experience. "The enemy machine guns never stop," he wrote on April 3rd. "When one gun must cool, another takes over. They fire like men who believe ammunition grows on trees. Today, I counted the sounds. For every burst our guns fire, they answer with 10. Yamamoto's mathematics, crude as they might have been, were profoundly accurate. They reflected a larger, more brutal truth. American industrial capacity supported machine gun employment on a scale that Japan, a nation struggling with limited resources and an overstretched war economy, could never hope to match. This wasn't just about weapon design. It was about the colossal infrastructure that lay behind every pull of a trigger. Consider this. The Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors, a single factory primarily converted from automobile production, produced over 390,000 M1919 Browning machine guns during the war. Let that number resonate. One American factory manufactured more machine guns than Japan's entire arsenal contained. It's a statistic that encapsulates the entire narrative of industrial disparity. Japan, an island nation with limited natural resources, had staked its military might on a smaller, more elite fighting force, relying on quality and fierce dedication. The United States, a continental powerhouse of industry and agriculture, had mobilized its entire economy for mass production, betting on quantity and overwhelming force. The M1919A4 Browning machine gun, a robust and dependable piece of engineering, weighed 31 pounds and typically required a crew of 5 men for optimal tactical employment. The squad leader directed fire and observed targets. The gunner aimed and fired the weapon, a steady, controlled ballet of destruction. The assistant gunner loaded the continuous belts of ammunition and helped carry the gun during movement, their muscles straining under the weight. 2 dedicated ammunition carriers kept the weapons supplied with the massive quantities of linked belts required for sustained operation, their hands a blur as they brought forward more and more rounds. And each man in this crew carried additional ammunition beyond his personal weapons and equipment. American machine gun crews trained with this abundance as their baseline assumption. They didn't learn to conserve, they learned to dominate. They learned to fire in sustained bursts of 8 to 12 rounds, with cooling periods strategically interleaved between extended firing sessions. They practiced rapid barrel changes, not because the barrels wore out from manufacturing defects, a testament to American quality control, but because they became incandescently hot from the continuous, high-volume firing. The very concept of ammunition conservation, which was so central to Japanese machine gun doctrine, simply did not exist in American tactical thinking. It was an alien concept, an unnecessary constraint. The M1919A4 fed from disintegrating metallic link belts, each typically holding 250 rounds of .30-06 ammunition. The loading procedure, while seemingly complex, became second nature to American crews. It involved inserting a pull tab from the left side of the gun until the feeding paw engaged the first round. The gunner would then pull the cocking handle twice with the palm facing up, a critical safety measure designed to prevent accidental discharge during the loading process. This entire sequence, performed thousands of times by American crews in training and then under the terrifying pressure of combat, became as routine, as thoughtless, as breathing itself. It was muscle memory, ingrained and perfected. Japanese machine gunners, by stark contrast, operated under a regimen of strict ammunition discipline, a reflection of their resource-constrained reality. The Type 99 light machine gun used a 30-round detachable magazine, requiring frequent, almost constant, reloading under fire. Each magazine change created a pause in fire, a precious moment of vulnerability, a breath in the storm that American machine gunners were ruthlessly trained to exploit with devastating effect. While Japanese gunners fumbled with fresh magazines, their American counterparts maintained continuous suppressive fire through overlapping fields of coverage, ensuring that the pressure never let up, that the enemy never had a moment's respite. Sergeant Ichiro Nakamura of the 22nd Infantry Regiment, fighting for every inch of ground during the brutal battle for Sugarloaf Hill, confided his despair to his diary. "Their fire never stops," he recorded. "When we attack, one gun fires while another loads. When we retreat, all guns fire together. They waste more ammunition in 1 hour than our company receives in 1 week." This observation, blunt in its assessment, touched on a fundamental difference in tactical philosophy, a clash of 2 diametrically opposed approaches to warfare. Japanese machine gun employment emphasized precision and conservation. Gunners selected specific targets, an exposed head, a moving figure, and engaged them with carefully aimed, economical bursts. It was a sniper's mentality, applied to automatic fire. American machine gun employment, however, emphasized area denial and suppression. Gunners fired not primarily to achieve specific kills, but to make a section of terrain utterly uninhabitable, to force the enemy to keep their heads down, to paralyze their movement, and to erode their will to fight. It was psychological warfare delivered through sheer volume of fire. The M1919A4 Browning excelled at this suppressive role. Its effective range of 1,100 yards allowed crews to dominate vast areas of terrain, shaping the battlefield with streams of tracer rounds. Its penetration capability enabled fire through light cover, thin wooden walls, sandbags, dense foliage that would easily stop smaller rifle rounds. And its robust reliability ensured continuous operation even in the harsh, unforgiving conditions of Pacific combat. From the sweltering humidity of jungle islands to the corrosive salt air of beach landings. Most importantly, its ammunition supply to the defenders facing American attacks seemed utterly limitless, an endless river of death. Staff Sergeant Robert Chun of the 96th Infantry Division, 7th Infantry Regiment, operated an M1919A4 during the harrowing assault on Kakazu Ridge, a heavily fortified Japanese position. His crew, in a single day of fighting, expended 4,000 rounds of 30,006 ammunition. This staggering expenditure, routine for American forces, represented more firepower than most Japanese companies possessed for an entire multi-day operation. It was a fundamental mismatch, a David and Goliath story where David had an infinite supply of slingshot stones, each one a high-velocity projectile. The psychological impact of facing such overwhelming firepower transcended mere tactical considerations. Japanese soldiers, trained in the ancient warrior tradition of Bushido, found their courage tested not by the enemy's skill or bravery, but by an industrial capacity expressed through the ceaseless roar of machine gun fire. They faced not individual opponents, but a terrifying, impersonal manifestation of American manufacturing might, a mechanized beast that consumed resources and spat out destruction without pause. Second Lieutenant Saburo Taniguchi, commanding a rifle platoon of the 96th Independent Mixed Brigade, wrote extensively about this profound psychological dimension. "The enemy does not fight like soldiers," he observed with a chilling clarity. "They fight like a factory that produces bullets and explosions. Their machine guns speak with the voice of 10,000 men." Taniguchi's metaphor, born of desperation and awe, captured an essential truth about American machine gun employment. The M1919A4 Browning represented more than just a weapon. It represented the direct conversion of American industrial capacity into sustained automatic fire. Every single round, fired by an M1919A4, connected the immediate, bloody battlefield to the vast, unseen production networks of American factories, the deep veins of American mines, and the efficient arteries of its transportation systems. It was the physical manifestation of an entire nation's economic power brought to bear on a single point in time and space. The contrast became most apparent, most viscerally horrific, when Japanese forces attempted offensive operations. Their traditional banzai charges, successful against forces with limited automatic weapons in earlier, less industrialized conflicts, proved suicidal, utterly catastrophic, against American machine gun positions. The mathematics of these encounters were unforgiving, brutal in their simplicity. A charging Japanese soldier, fueled by unshakable resolve and spiritual fervor, typically covered the final 100 yards to American positions in approximately 15 seconds. During those same 15 seconds, an M1919A4 Browning, firing at 600 rounds per minute, could deliver 150 rounds. Multiply that by overlapping fields of fire from multiple weapons, a standard American defensive setup, and charging forces faced literally thousands of bullets during their final desperate approach. It was like trying to run through a wall of solid lead. The Battle of Saipan, on July 7, 1944, illustrated these terrible mathematics with chilling clarity. Captain Samaji Inoue led 4,000 Japanese soldiers in what became the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. They attacked positions held by the American 27th Infantry Division, whose weapons platoons included not just M1919A4 machine guns, but also the formidable M2 Browning heavy machine guns. The attack, a desperate, valiant, and ultimately hopeless human wave, lasted for 6 harrowing hours. By dawn, 3,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead, their bodies strewn across the landscape, a testament to the unyielding power they faced. American casualties, by contrast, numbered fewer than 1,000. It was a massacre, not a battle, a statistical annihilation. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, became a legendary figure, exemplifying American machine gun employment during this attack. When Japanese forces overran his forward positions, O'Brien, rather than retreating, personally manned an M2 Browning heavy machine gun. The 50 caliber Browning, affectionately nicknamed Ma Deuce by American troops for its raw, brutal power, fired between 485 and 635 rounds per minute of devastating 50 BMG ammunition. Each round weighed a staggering 706.7 grains and achieved muzzle velocities exceeding 2,750 feet per second. O'Brien fired the M2 Browning until ammunition exhaustion, then continued fighting with pistols and rifle, a one-man bulwark against the charging enemy. When American forces eventually retook the position, they found O'Brien's body, a warrior to the last, surrounded by the corpses of 30 Japanese soldiers. The M2 Browning beside him, a silent sentinel, had fired so many rounds that its barrel glowed red-hot in the pre-dawn darkness, a stark monument to its relentless fury. The M2 Browning represented the apex of American machine gun development, a true masterpiece of lethal engineering. Designed by the legendary John Moses Browning near the end of World War I, this weapon entered service in 1933 and remained virtually unchanged, a testament to its timeless effectiveness through decades of conflict, from World War II to Vietnam and even beyond. Its 50 caliber ammunition provided not only devastating anti-personnel effects, capable of ripping a human body apart, but also retained sufficient power to penetrate light armor and fortifications, making it a versatile and terrifying threat across the battlefield. Where the M1919A4 required careful fire control to prevent overheating during prolonged engagements, the M2 Browning operated with remarkable thermal efficiency. Its massive, heavy barrel was specifically designed to absorb and dissipate the immense heat generated by sustained firing, allowing experienced crews to fire hundreds of rounds without pause. Barrel changes were necessary only when tactical situations demanded continuous fire beyond even its impressive normal thermal limits. Japanese forces facing M2 Browning positions encountered firepower that redefined their very understanding of battlefield lethality, a weapon that tore through flesh and spirit with equal impunity. Private Masao Watanabe, a survivor of the Saipan assault, described his experience in chilling testimony given to American interrogators. "The big machine gun sounds different," he said, his voice likely still haunted by the memory. "Not like the small ones that rattle. The big gun speaks with the voice of thunder. When it fires, men disappear." Watanabe's visceral description reflected the devastating terminal effects of .50 caliber ammunition, unlike .30 caliber rounds that killed through conventional wounding mechanisms. BMG bullets transferred massive kinetic energy to human targets, often causing catastrophic injuries that rendered the victim unrecognizable. The hydraulic shock effects of .50 caliber impacts often proved lethal even when bullets struck non-vital areas, turning internal organs into pulp. Japanese soldiers quickly learned to fear the deep, rhythmic hammering of M2 Browning fire above all other battlefield sounds, a sound that presaged swift, brutal, and often complete annihilation. The industrial scale of American ammunition production supported a level of tactical employment that Japanese forces found utterly incomprehensible. During the 82-day battle for Okinawa alone, American forces expended a staggering 16 million rounds of 30 caliber machine gun ammunition. To put this into perspective, this figure represents more ammunition than Japan produced for all its machine guns during entire years of the war. It wasn't just a difference in philosophy. It was a difference in fundamental capacity, a chasm that could not be bridged by courage or skill alone. Captain Minoru Yoshida, an artillery observer for the 32nd Army, recorded his observations of American ammunition expenditure in a diary recovered after the battle. "I am truly surprised at the amount of ammunition that the enemy has," he wrote in late April, his words tinged with a blend of awe and despair. "When friendly forces fire one round, at least 10 rounds are guaranteed to come back." Yoshida's 10-1 ratio, chillingly confirmed by other Japanese accounts, reflected not a tactical choice by the Americans, but a fundamental logistical reality. American forces possessed ammunition in quantities that permitted suppressive fire as standard, almost casual, procedure. Japanese forces, on the other hand, conserved ammunition because scarcity left them absolutely no alternative. It was a matter of survival, not preference. This disparity extended far beyond immediate battlefield effects. American machine gun crews received continuous resupply through sophisticated logistics networks, a marvel of wartime engineering. Landing ships transported ammunition directly to forward supply dumps, often practically on the beachheads themselves. Specialized ammunition carriers, a dedicated and often unheralded corps, delivered linked belts directly to fighting positions, ensuring a constant flow of lifeblood to the guns. The entire American war effort, from the factories in the heartland to the farthest-flung Pacific outpost, prioritized keeping machine guns firing, a relentless pulse of destruction. Japanese ammunition resupply, by tragic contrast, relied on increasingly tenuous transportation networks. As American forces systematically captured key bases and shipping routes, Japanese garrisons found themselves isolated, cut off, with whatever ammunition they possessed when the siege began. Careful conservation became not just tactical doctrine, but a grim existential survival necessity. Corporal Hoshi Yamada, a machine gunner with the 24th Independent Mixed Brigade on Iwo Jima, articulated this stark reality in letters found after the battle. "We fire 5 rounds where the Americans fire 50, he wrote, his words a testament to the brutal choices he faced. Not because 5 rounds are sufficient, but because 5 rounds are all we have. Yamada's unit faced the ferocious 5th Marine Division during the assault on Hill 362A. Marine weapons platoons supported the attack with M1919A4 machine guns, firing in sustained bursts to suppress Japanese defensive positions. The Marines expended more ammunition, preparing for their attack, than Yamada's entire company possessed for the defense. It was a war of attrition, where one side had an infinite well, and the other, a rapidly draining puddle. The battle for Iwo Jima highlighted another dimension of American machine gun supremacy: innovation under combat conditions. Necessity, combined with industrial capability, truly became the mother of invention. Marine Sergeant Milan Gravich and Private First Class John Little, displaying remarkable ingenuity, converted 30 Sausage caliber and M2 aircraft machine guns into man-portable weapons, affectionately nicknamed Stingers. These modified weapons retained the M2's devastating rate of fire, an astonishing 1,500 rounds per minute, while adding bipods, stocks, and triggers for effective ground combat. Corporal Tony Stein, a true hero, carried a Stinger during the initial assault on Iwo Jima. The weapon's incredible rate of fire allowed him to deliver suppressive firepower equivalent to multiple standard machine guns. Stein used the Stinger to cover his squad's advance across open terrain, firing long, continuous bursts that kept Japanese defenders pinned in their fortifications, unable to lift their heads or return fire effectively. His heroic actions earned him the Medal of Honor, and more importantly, demonstrated the American ability to adapt superior firepower to changing tactical requirements, a dynamic flexibility born of abundance. Japanese forces, tragically, possessed no equivalent capability for innovation or adaptation in this regard. Their machine gun designs largely remained static throughout the war, constrained not just by industrial capacity, but by severe raw material shortages and a more rigid military-industrial complex. Where Americans converted aircraft weapons for ground use, Japanese forces often had to strip armament from disabled aircraft merely to obtain spare parts for their existing, failing weapons. It was a stark difference between building and cannibalizing. The Type 92 heavy machine gun, the backbone of many Japanese defensive positions, fired 7.7 by 58mm ammunition from 30-round strips. Its rate of fire approached a respectable 450 rounds per minute by international standards, but it was profoundly insufficient against the relentless torrent of American assault tactics. More critically, the Type 92 required careful maintenance and frequent parts replacement, a luxury that evaporated as the war progressed. As supply lines deteriorated and American interdiction became more effective, Type 92 machine guns became increasingly unreliable, a source of constant frustration and growing despair for their crews. First Lieutenant Akira, commanding a heavy machine gun company on Okinawa, recorded the progressive degradation of his weapons in detailed diary entries, a grim chronicle of decline. "Gun number 3 has ceased functioning," he wrote on May 15th. "The firing pin has broken and no replacement parts are available. Gun number 5 fires only single shots due to extraction problems. We have become a rifle company with heavier weapons." SAD's experience was not unique. It reflected broader Japanese challenges with weapon maintenance under siege conditions, a systemic breakdown of their logistical and industrial systems. American machine guns, designed for mass production and robust field service, operated reliably with minimal maintenance. The M1919A4 Browning, for instance, used robust components and simple mechanisms that functioned admirably despite harsh treatment and limited cleaning. Japanese machine guns, often designed with a preference for precision manufacturing and requiring careful maintenance, failed progressively as supply lines collapsed. Their complex mechanisms required frequent adjustment and precise parts replacement, elements that became impossible to procure. Precision-fitted components seized when proper lubricants became unavailable, turning once effective weapons into expensive, heavy junk. What began as competitive weapon systems degraded into sources of profound frustration, demoralization, and crippling tactical weakness. The contrast became most apparent during the final, brutal phases of Pacific Island battles. As American forces closed in on Japanese defensive positions, close-range firefights, often fought in the suffocating confines of tunnels and caves, revealed the full, horrifying extent of firepower disparities. American squads, robustly supported by M1919A4 machine guns, delivered overwhelming automatic fire at ranges where Japanese rifles and their limited light machine guns proved tragically inadequate. Sergeant Taro Miyazaki, commanding a squad of the 109th Infantry Battalion on Okinawa, described such an engagement in his final diary entry. a testament penned in the shadow of certain death. The Americans advance with their machine guns firing continuously. He wrote. We fire back with rifles and grenade launchers, but our bullets seem like raindrops against their storm. Miyazaki's squad occupied positions on Shuri Ridge, the strongest defensive complex in the entire Japanese Okinawa defense system, a fortress built into the rock itself. American forces attacking these positions included companies from the 1st Marine Division, each equipped with multiple M1919A4 machine guns and supported by M2 Browning heavy machine guns mounted on vehicles and in fixed positions. The sheer volume was biblical in its destructive power. The mathematical advantages compounded exponentially during extended engagements. American machine gun crews fired until ammunition requirements forced resupply breaks, which were brief and easily managed. Japanese defenders, by tragic contrast, fired until ammunition exhaustion forced position abandonment, retreat, or suicidal charges. The timescale difference was often measured in hours. Americans withdrew to reload and resupply. The Japanese withdrew or were annihilated to survive, if survival was even an option. Private Yoshio Nakagawa, an ammunition carrier for a Type 99 light machine gun section, miraculously survived the battle for Shuri Ridge and provided detailed, chilling testimony about Japanese ammunition limitations. On the last day, our machine gun had 12 rounds, he recalled, his voice a haunting echo of the past. The gunner saved these rounds for the final American attack. When it came, he fired all 12 rounds in 2 bursts. Then we fought with bayonets. Nakagawa's account starkly illustrates the desperate, impossible tactical choices forced by ammunition scarcity. Japanese machine gunners hoarded their final, precious rounds for decisive, often suicidal moments, frequently holding fire even while under attack to preserve ammunition for what they considered truly critical situations. American machine gunners, confident in an endless pipeline of resupply, fired whenever targets presented themselves, knowing that the flow would never cease. This profound difference in employment philosophy created cascading effects throughout the entire tactical engagement. American infantry advanced under continuous machine gun support, knowing with absolute certainty that suppressive fire would pin defenders during their movement, giving them precious moments of relative safety. Japanese infantry moved without such support, knowing that precious machine gun ammunition had to be preserved for defensive emergencies, exposing them to devastating American fire. The psychological effects of this disparity extended far beyond immediate combat stress. Japanese soldiers developed a profound sense of helplessness when facing American machine gun positions. They understood, with a chilling clarity that ate at their morale, that Japanese industrial capacity could never, ever match American ammunition expenditure. They fought, knowing that every bullet fired, every brief burst from their own weapons, brought them closer to complete, irreversible ammunition exhaustion. Commander Tadamaki Kurebayashi, the brilliant but tragically outmatched general commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, addressed this crushing reality in his final, poignant message to Imperial General Headquarters. "The enemy's firepower is overwhelming," he reported, his words a testament to the unyielding force he faced. "Our men fight bravely, but courage cannot survive unlimited ammunition." Kurabayashi's assessment reflected the perspective of a professional military officer confronting the raw, undeniable reality of industrial warfare. Japanese training emphasized spiritual preparation, unshakable courage, and tactical skill, noble virtues rooted in ancient tradition. American preparation emphasized material superiority, overwhelming firepower, and logistical efficiency, virtues rooted in the industrial age. When these two philosophies met in the crucible of combat, the material advantages proved decisive, brutal, and tragically unanswerable. The M1919A4 Browning machine gun embodied this American approach to warfare. Designed for mass production rather than artisanal perfection, engineered for rugged field reliability rather than hyper-precision, and employed for suppressive effect rather than targeted elimination, the weapon succeeded not because of superior design sophistication, but because of superior industrial support. It was a tool effectively wielded by a system. American machine gun crews received training that assumed unlimited ammunition availability. They learned suppressive fire techniques that consumed thousands of rounds per engagement, a level of expenditure that would be unthinkable for any other army. They practiced sustained fire missions that heated barrels to near-failure temperatures, routinely swapping them out without a second thought. They developed tactical procedures based on firepower abundance, a luxury rather than firepower conservation. Japanese machine gun crews received training that emphasized precision and conservation, a starkly different paradigm. They learned to engage specific targets with carefully measured bursts, making every shot count. They practiced ammunition discipline that treated every single round as precious, a commodity to be hoarded. They developed tactical procedures based on scarcity, an ever-present grinding constraint. When these contrasting approaches met in combat, the results were tragically predictable. American crews delivered overwhelming firepower that dominated entire sectors of the battlefield, turning vast swaths of land into death zones. Japanese crews delivered precise fire that achieved local effects, sometimes inflicting painful casualties, but could not hope to match American area suppression, the continuous paralyzing torrent that defined the American method. The battle for Kakazu Ridge demonstrated these differences with stark, undeniable clarity. American forces attacking the ridge included elements of the 96th Infantry Division, whose weapons platoons carried M1919A4 machine guns with 2,000 rounds per gun, their supply lines stretching back to a continent of factories. Japanese forces defending the ridge included elements of the 32nd Army, whose machine gun companies rationed their ammunition to pitiful levels, desperately trying to extend their operational capability just a little longer. Staff Sergeant James Morrison, gunner for an M1919A4 crew in the 382nd Infantry Regiment, described the engagement from the American perspective, a testament to the resilience of his weapon and the effectiveness of his tactics. We fired for 6 hours straight, changing barrels twice, he recalled with a hint of grim satisfaction. The gun never jammed, never failed. We went through 16 belts of ammunition before the ridge was secure. Morrison's crew expended 4,000 rounds of .30-06 ammunition during this single engagement, a routine day's work. This expenditure, as we've noted, represented more firepower than most Japanese companies possessed for extended operations. The tactical result reflected this profound disparity. American forces captured Kakazu Ridge with acceptable casualties, while Japanese forces defending the ridge suffered near complete destruction. It was an unequal contest, not of courage, but of capability. Lieutenant Kenji Arakawa, commanding a rifle platoon defending Kakazu Ridge, survived the battle and provided haunting testimony about Japanese ammunition limitations. We had perhaps 200 rounds for our Type 99 machine gun, he recalled, the memory still fresh and painful. The Americans fired 200 rounds in the first minute of their attack. Arakawa's estimate, while approximate, captured the essential, soul-crushing reality of the firepower disparity. American machine gun crews fired ammunition at rates that Japanese forces could not comprehend, let alone counter. The sustained automatic fire created psychological effects that degraded Japanese defensive effectiveness, even when physical casualties remained, initially, manageable. It broke their spirit before it broke their bodies. The very sound signature of American machine gun fire became a source of profound, existential terror for Japanese defenders. The M1919A4 produced a distinctive, high-pitched ripping sound at 600 rounds per minute, a continuous tearing of the air, unlike the measured, distinct bursts of Japanese weapons. The M2 Browning, a true monster of a weapon, created a deep, rhythmic hammering, a thunderous, percussive boom that carried for miles across Pacific battlefields, a sound of unshakable, relentless power. Corporal Saburo Takahashi, a communications specialist with the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade, described these acoustic effects in letters to his family, his words echoing the fear and exhaustion. "The American machine guns never sleep," he wrote. "Day and night they speak with voices of metal rain. When the big guns fire, the ground shakes like an earthquake." Takahashi's description reflected the cumulative psychological impact of facing overwhelming firepower. Japanese soldiers endured constant, unrelenting stress from machine gun fire that seemed unlimited in duration and intensity. Sleep became an impossible luxury under continuous, suppressive fire. Movement, even minor repositioning, became suicidal under the overlapping fields of automatic weapons coverage. The battlefield became a cage, and the bullets, the bars. American machine gun employment created tactical effects that far exceeded the sum of mere physical damage. Suppressive fire forced Japanese defenders to remain tightly confined in covered positions, reducing their ability to observe American movements, to coordinate their own actions, and to direct effective defensive fires. The continuous, deafening automatic fire masked the sounds of American tactical movement, preventing Japanese forces from tracking enemy disposition, from anticipating flanking maneuvers, or even from distinguishing between real advances and feints. The integrated employment of M1919A4 and M2 Browning machine guns created layered defensive and offensive effects that Japanese forces simply could not penetrate. Light machine guns provided close-range suppression and devastating anti-personnel fires, clearing paths for advancing infantry. Heavy machine guns provided long-range interdiction and anti-material effects, shredding fortifications and light vehicles. Together, they created impenetrable zones of battlefield control that Japanese forces, with their limited resources, could not contest. Master Sergeant Robert Tanaka, a weapons platoon sergeant with the 7th Infantry Division, meticulously coordinated machine gun employment during the assault on Hill 178 on Okinawa. His platoon included 6 M1919A4 light machine guns and 2 M2 Browning heavy machine guns, supported by a colossal 20,000 rounds of linked ammunition. We established overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach to our positions, Tanaka explained in post-battle interviews, his voice calm, professional, and confident. Japanese forces could not move without exposure to automatic weapons fire. They were pinned in place until artillery could eliminate them. Tanaka's tactical employment reflected American doctrine that emphasized firepower coordination, a symphony of destruction, rather than individual weapon superiority. Machine guns worked together, in concert, to create comprehensive area denial, a vast zone of no man's land, rather than engaging individual targets in a piecemeal fashion. The cumulative effect paralyzed Japanese tactical movement, rendering their soldiers immobile and vulnerable. Japanese forces, heartbreakingly, lacked the ammunition resources to employ comparable suppressive fires. Their machine guns engaged specific targets with carefully aimed bursts, achieving kills but tragically failing to create area effects, failing to pin down the enemy, failing to provide critical covering fire for their own movements. American forces moved under the impenetrable cover of suppressive fire from multiple automatic weapons. Japanese forces moved without such vital support, exposing themselves to devastating American firepower, their bravery often leading only to their demise. The industrial foundation, supporting American machine gun employment, remained largely invisible to Japanese defenders, yet it determined every single tactical outcome. Factories in Detroit, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, humming with wartime production, produced millions of rounds of machine gun ammunition monthly, a relentless tide of material. Transportation networks, robust and efficient, delivered this ammunition to Pacific bases with clockwork regularity. Supply systems meticulously planned and executed ensured that frontline units never, ever faced ammunition shortages, a logistical miracle that Japan could only dream of. Japanese ammunition production, by stark contrast, struggled desperately to meet even basic requirements. Copper shortages, a critical raw material for cartridge cases, limited production. Steel allocation priorities often favored naval construction, a desperate attempt to maintain their fleet over the less glamorous but equally vital small arms ammunition. Transportation difficulties, exacerbated by American submarine warfare and aerial interdiction, prevented adequate distribution of whatever limited ammunition was produced. These industrial realities created tactical choices that Japanese commanders understood with a profound, bitter clarity, but could not alter. They rationed ammunition not because conservation was tactically preferable. They knew the power of suppressive fire, but because alternatives simply did not exist. They emphasized precision fire not because area suppression was ineffective, but because they lacked the ammunition for sustained automatic fire. It was a choice forced upon them by the grinding gears of industrial disparity. Colonel Hirami Yahara, Chief of Staff for the 32nd Army on Okinawa, addressed this crushing reality in his memoirs. His words, a poignant epitaph for an entire army. "We understood American tactical methods," he wrote. "We could not match American material resources. Our soldiers fought with the skill of samurai, but the equipment of peasants." Yahara's assessment, brutally honest, captured the fundamental, insurmountable challenge facing Japanese forces throughout the Pacific War. Professional competence, ancestral courage, and tactical skill, however profound, proved tragically insufficient against overwhelming material superiority. Machine gun firepower represented the most visible, the most immediate, and the most devastating manifestation of this material disparity. The final phase of Pacific Island battles often degenerated into desperate, close-range firefights, meat grinders where Japanese ammunition shortages became most agonizingly apparent. American assault forces advanced under the continuous, deafening cover of sustained machine gun fire until they reached effective range for grenades and small arms. At this point, Japanese defenders, cornered and exhausted, faced the stark, brutal choice: expend their remaining, precious ammunition in a last, futile stand, or accept defeat, which often meant suicidal charges or being burned out of their positions. Private First Class Hiroshi Nakamura, a rifleman with the 89th Infantry Regiment, survived the final apocalyptic defense of Shuri Castle on Okinawa. His account describes the chilling tactical choices forced by ammunition scarcity. "Our machine gun had 15 rounds remaining," he recalled, his voice a whisper from the past. The sergeant saved these for the final American assault. When it came, he fired all 15 rounds, then threw the gun at the Americans and fought with his sword. Nakamura's account illustrates the desperate, almost theatrical measures forced by ammunition exhaustion. Japanese machine gunners, reduced to single-digit round counts, made their final, symbolic contribution to the defense, and then, with their modern weapons useless, reverted to the ancient, bloody art of hand-to-hand combat. American machine gunners, supported by what seemed to be unlimited ammunition, continued firing, wave after wave, until resistance utterly ceased. The contrast between Japanese ammunition discipline, a virtue born of desperation, and American ammunition abundance, a luxury born of industrial might, created psychological effects that extended far beyond immediate combat situations. Japanese soldiers understood, deep in their bones, that every round fired brought them closer to helplessness, to the moment when their rifles would click empty and their machine guns would fall silent. American soldiers understood that ammunition resupply maintained their tactical superiority indefinitely, a boundless wellspring of power. This psychological dimension influenced decision-making at every level of command, from the lowest private to the highest general. Japanese officers planned operations meticulously around ammunition limitations, often declining tactically sound maneuvers because they would exhaust precious, irreplaceable reserves. They fought with a constant eye on the ledger of bullets. American officers planned operations around firepower availability, confident that ammunition resupply would support extended engagements, knowing that the factory floor was always open. The M1919A4 Browning machine gun, more than just a piece of metal, enabled an American tactical flexibility that Japanese forces, shackled by scarcity, could not hope to match. Squads supported by automatic weapons advanced aggressively, knowing that suppressive fire would cover their movement, a protective shield of lead. Platoons equipped with multiple machine guns controlled large areas of terrain through coordinated fires, shaping the battlefield to their will. Companies with integrated machine gun support operated independently for extended periods, miniature armies unto themselves, self-sustaining engines of destruction. Japanese forces, limited by ammunition constraints, operated with increasing tactical rigidity, their movements predictable, their options few. Squads conserved automatic weapons fire for critical situations, often failing to support movement when suppression was most desperately needed, leading to unnecessary casualties. Platoons hoarded machine gun ammunition for defensive emergencies, drastically reducing their capability for offensive operations, for seizing the initiative. Companies facing ammunition shortages abandoned equipment and positions rather than risk complete exhaustion, a terrible, forced choice between death now or death later. These tactical differences compounded relentlessly throughout extended engagements. American forces maintained offensive pressure through continuous automatic weapons support, a relentless hammer blow. Japanese forces lost offensive capability, their strength draining away as ammunition stocks diminished, a slow, agonizing bleed. The mathematical progression favored American victory regardless of initial force ratios or defensive advantages. It was a war of attrition that only one side could truly win. Staff Sergeant William Chun, a machine gun section leader with the 27th Infantry Division, observed this grim progression during the Saipan campaign. By the third day, Japanese machine gun fire became sporadic, he noted in his combat diary, a clinical observation of decline. By the fifth day, we rarely heard their automatic weapons. By the seventh day, they were fighting with rifles and grenades. Chen's observations reflected the tactical degradation inexorably imposed by ammunition limitations. Japanese forces began campaigns with competitive automatic weapons capability, but lost this advantage through consumption, their strength eroding with every fired round. American forces maintained automatic weapons superiority throughout extended operations through continuous, unimpeded resupply, a river that never ran dry. The final Japanese strongholds on Pacific Islands often fell not to direct assault, but to the slow, agonizing death of ammunition exhaustion. Defenders who had fought effectively for weeks, holding out against immense odds, found themselves reduced to individual weapons with critically limited ammunition, their guns becoming little more than clubs. Positions that had withstood relentless bombardment and attack became utterly untenable when the machine guns, the very voice of defense, fell silent. Lieutenant Jiro Watanabe, commanding the final defensive position on Hill 89 during the Okinawa campaign, described this process in his final desperate radio transmission. "Machine gun ammunition expended," he reported, the words heavy with defeat. "Rifle ammunition is critical. Position no longer tenable. Will attack with the remaining men." Watanabe's transmission reflected the tactical reality facing Japanese commanders throughout the Pacific War. Ammunition, exhaustion, forced the abandonment of defensible positions and the conversion from desperate defensive operations to even more desperate, suicidal offensive attacks. The final Japanese attacks, those last fervent banzai charges, often represented not a tactical choice born of strategy, but an ammunition-driven necessity, a final, despairing gesture against an unstoppable force. American forces facing these final attacks met them with machine gun fire that remained as devastating, as unrelenting, as on the first day of battle. The M1919A4 Browning crews that had suppressed Japanese positions for weeks continued firing, their guns roaring, until the very last attacker fell. Ammunition abundance enabled a sustained firepower that matched any level of Japanese desperation, any surge of courage, and ultimately extinguished it. The mathematical finality of these encounters reflected the broader industrial contest between American production capacity and Japanese military requirements. Every round fired by an M1919A4 or M2 Browning represented the American ability to convert vast raw materials, steel, copper, gunpowder, into tangible, devastating battlefield effects. Every round conserved by Japanese forces represented their tragic inability to match this conversion, their inability to sustain the fight on an industrial scale. The Pacific War became, in its final, brutal analysis, a contest not just between brave soldiers or brilliant commanders, but between American industrial capacity and Japanese military skill. When these forces met in the form of machine gun firepower, industrial capacity proved not just advantageous, but utterly decisive. The M1919A4 and M2 Browning machine guns delivered not just bullets, but the concentrated productive power of American factories, the deep veins of its mines, and the efficient arteries of its transportation networks. They were the mechanical extensions of an entire economic system. Japanese soldiers faced this industrial firepower with a courage that American forces themselves acknowledged and respected, a valor born of their ancient traditions. But courage, however profound, could not overcome the cold, hard mathematics of production. Skill, however honed, could not compensate for scarcity. Training, however rigorous, could not substitute for ammunition. The machine guns spoke with the undeniable, thunderous voice of American industrial might, and Japan, fighting with a philosophy rooted in a bygone era, had no answer. In the coral caves of Okinawa, the volcanic tunnels of Iwo Jima, and the dense jungle positions of countless other Pacific islands, Japanese defenders learned a sound, a new language of war, the sound of American supremacy. It was the ripping roar of the M1919A4, firing 600 rounds per minute, a continuous tearing of the fabric of reality. It was the thunderous hammering of the M2 Browning, delivering 50 caliber destruction that made men disappear. It was the voice of unlimited ammunition speaking to forces that had none, a monologue of pure, unadulterated power. The machine guns that, in many ways, won the Pacific War succeeded not primarily through superior design or tactical innovation, but through superior supply, through sheer, overwhelming volume. They represented the American ability to sustain firepower at levels Japanese forces could never hope to match, a relentless, unyielding deluge. They embodied the industrial transformation of warfare, a paradigm shift that placed production capacity and logistical prowess above traditional military virtues like individual bravery or tactical ingenuity. When the guns finally fell silent across the Pacific, they left behind a lesson, stark and undeniable, written in the cold, hard statistics of ammunition expenditure and the tragic reports of casualties. Industrial warfare, a new and brutal chapter in human conflict, demanded industrial resources on an unprecedented scale. Firepower superiority, the ability to dominate the battlefield with overwhelming force, unequivocally required production superiority. Victory, in this new age, belonged not merely to the most skilled or the most courageous forces, but to those supported by the most productive factories, the most efficient supply chains, the most robust national economies. The M1919A4 and M2 Browning machine guns delivered this lesson with mathematical precision. Every round fired, every position suppressed, every attack defeated, demonstrated the American ability to convert colossal industrial capacity into unchallengeable battlefield dominance. Japan learned too late that modern warfare was not won by warriors, however fierce, but by factories, by the relentless, grinding output of industry. The sound of those machine guns, that terrifying symphony of metal rain and thunder, echoed across the Pacific long after their barrels cooled. It was the sound of American industrial power, fully and terrifyingly applied to military purposes. It was the sound of unlimited ammunition meeting desperate courage, a clash that could only end one way. It was the sound of Japan's defeat, written in the unforgiving, brutal language of automatic weapons.